Hello, and welcome to another edition of Peninsula 24.
International community has galvanized efforts to strengthen North Korea's sanctions after the North carried out the fifth nuclear test. On today's Peninsula 24, we will discuss the global cooperation on North Korea sanctions, which aims to deal with the continuing military provocations from the North and to achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
For today's discussion, we have Park Heung-soon, Vice President of the Korean Association of the United Nations, Dr. Myong-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies.
Thanks for having me.
Professor Kwang-kyu from Maebong Institute for One Korea.
Thank you for my participation in this program.
It has been almost 8 months since the UN Security Council adopted the Resolution 2270 after the North carried out its fourth nuclear test. It has been regarded as the strongest ever sanction against Pyongyang. How actively the global society participated in the implementation of the resolution?
I think the sanctions on the resolution 2270 now on getting on the right track. The Spanish representative who chairs the 1718 Sanctions Committee in the Security Council is reported to have said that 66 member states submitted their implementation reports so far. This is the second highest record in series of UN sanctions, 4 different sanctions. This is the highest number of member states joined the sanctions resolutions. So I believe that's the one really pushing for actual implementation of UN sanctions.
North Korea's friendly countries, including Switzerland, Cuba, and Uganda, have been under suspicion of being involved in the financial transaction of the North. However, those countries have decided to join the Resolution 2270 to enforce toughened global sanctions against North Korea. Do you think it can be an effective way for the international isolation of the North Korea?
Diplomatically and politically, I think definitely the adherence to sanctions by different nations around the world is a very important factor in also policy success. But then the big challenge right now is the implementation of sanctions by China. As you may know, North Korea depends on China for bulk of its trade. To the tune of 90% of trade is with China. So, but then when it comes to China's implementation of the report 2270, there's much to be desired. There's definitely a political opposition from the Chinese government to implement the sanctions fully, and in addition to implement other sanctions, such as the economic sanctions against the export of mineral ores from North Korea. So I would say that this is actually a mixed picture rather than a very positive picture.
International community has discussed the tougher sanction against the North after the fifth nuclear test. How do you view the current state of the North Korean sanction imposed by the global society, including the UN?
Yes, as previously said, more than 16 countries now participating in the UN sanctions, and North Korea is isolated in the global society, and the increase of the instability of the Kim Jong-un regime, the imposition of additional sanctions in the wake of the fifth nuclear test is currently under discussion at the UN. It is expected that the might include some sanctions targeting private exchanges, such as coal trade for livelihood purpose and Exxon. And the restrictions on North Korean workers finding jobs overseas because of the North Korean workers' wages overseas are used to develop the nuclear weapons in North Korea. And then financial sanctions, including a secondary boycott, which regulating the financial transactions of third country to deal with North Korea, is also may expected next step, I think.
Current sanctions on North Korea, which have been led by the US, have focused on imposing economic pressure on North. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, has urged members to shut down overseas North Korean bank branches and to sever financial ties with the North. Some people have said that it might replicate the effect of the blacklist of the Macau-based Banco Delta Asia, BDA, over its dealing with North Korea. What is your take on this?
The experience with the BDA some years ago by United States has been assessed as a very successful venture imposed upon North Korea for making them to come to the table for negotiations. And I remember at that time North Korea almost begged for lifting that freezing assets in BDA. I think the international community has learned a lot from that experience. This freezing financial assets and blocking transactions may have a very great impact upon North Korea. So the international community now has determination for collective actions against North Korea. I think this is really going to be an effective measure against North Korean regime for isolating them, for pressuring the regime.
U.S. has designated the Chinese Hongxiang Group for allegedly violating the Weapons of Mass Destruction Proliferator Sanctions Regulation, WMD-PSR. It means that the U.S. imports the secondary boycott in a runaway way. It is the first time for the U.S. to directly impose a Chinese firm. What kind of impact can we expect to see?
Well, clearly we'll see some deterrence effect on the Chinese firms that are conducting transactions in the North Korean state. There's no doubt about it, because a lot of these Chinese conglomerates, they don't only deal with North Korea, they also export items to United States, so they are sensitive to the measures taken by the United States government. And Liaoning Hongxiang was exporting merchandise to the United States. But then I would disagree a little bit about characterizing Liaoning Hongxiang as the beginning of a secondary boycott by the U.S. government. Clearly, U.S. government targeted Liaoning Hongxiang based on the Liaoning Hongxiang's transaction, which involved the dual-use goods, which in this case was the aluminum oxide that could be used for the development of weapons of mass destruction. But then there's definitely a huge difference between sanctioning a single company and then implementing a wholesale secondary boycott regimen against a country like China. I think the United States government is very careful about creating a strong opposition from the Chinese government, because had the United States imposed a secondary boycott, had targeted Liaoning Hongxiang as part of a secondary boycott regime, then Chinese government wouldn't have cooperated with the United States in punishing Liaoning Hongxiang, because after all, the government that punished Liaoning Hongxiang, arrested the owner of Liaoning Hongxiang, happened to be the Chinese government itself. So I think the United States government itself will be very careful in characterizing this as a first example of a secondary boycott.
The U.S. has reached a nuclear agreement with Iran by blocking its oil export through the secondary boycott sanctions. What's the difference between the case of Iran and North Korea?
Yeah, sanctions on Iran and North Korea, something that differ in approach rather than strengths. North Korea and Iran sanctions target for financial is similar to focus on the third country, which deal with financial institutions over companies. But Iran Sanctions Act, adopted by U.S. in national legislations by the United States energy companies to do with the United States domestic agents, as well as foreign business, and even impose sanctions on the financial institution. So isolated Iran economically, trading room to block the way sanctions measures. But North Korea, like Iran about system, is differed by invoking an executive order not institutionalized by law to impose sanctions as a way. Based on the U.S. administrative actions, according to the executive order, it is more wide and comprehensive sanctions in relation to Iran. That Iran sanctions focus on the general people because Iran's economic scale is very big, bigger than the North Korea. But the attack on the North Korea sanction is a smart sanction, only for focus on the leadership group.
On October 19th, Foreign and Defense Minister of Korea and the US met in Washington, D.C. and agreed to provide extended deterrence to address evolving threats from the North. The US Secretary of State John Kerry has said that the US is focusing on plugging a loophole and preventing abuse of the existing resolution that allows the North's coal exports for livelihood purposes. What do you think the real reason for the statement?
I believe that the previous sanctions on the Resolution 2270 and others imposed comprehensive economic sanctions, already Professor Nam mentioned, but they have also some leeway or loopholes. There is exceptional clauses allowing humanitarian or livelihood purposes. So I think China and North Korea, both countries abuse the systems. They take advantage of these loopholes for illegal trade, including exporting of coals. I think the additional measures under consideration by the Security Council now try to block or minimize this loophole so the sanctions measures can be more effective. So I think that that's the indication United States government try to introduce some additional measures to cover that particular problems.
UNSC Resolution 2270 has permitted North Korea's coal trade for livelihood purposes. But according to the recent statement by the US, tougher sanctions are going to be imposed in order to fill some of the existing loopholes.
Greatest amount of coal and the greatest amount of revenue historically has just passed between China and North Korea. And that is hardly putting in place the kinds of sanctions.
Does it mean that current sanctions against North Korea are not working effectively?
Clearly, it's not working effectively enough to stop North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. As you have witnessed this year, North Korea doesn't seem to be feeling too bothered by the international sanctions arrayed against it at this moment. So there's this issue of speeding up sanctions, putting more sanctions in place so that there's more immediate pain felt by North Korea. And that's the challenge here. So without China agreeing to getting rid of this exception clause that Professor Park just mentioned, it will be very difficult for North Korea to feel immediate pain. So for the international community, the challenge here is to find other ways to cause pain to the North Korean regime, and then we have to be very imaginative about it. So I think, as far as I know, other countries in the neighborhood, such as Japan and other countries, United States obviously, and South Korea, are thinking about stopping the stream of illicit revenues earned by the North Korean regime. So this will be such as revenue gain from the export of North Korean workers overseas. So I think overall, the measures, when they all add up, will have some significant effect on the North Korean regime.
After the North's fifth nuclear test, the US government has urged the countries to downgrade or sever diplomatic ties with North Korea. What's the significance of it, and what kind of impact can we expect to see when such demand from US is actually fulfilled?
I think the U.S. more stressed on the some sanctions take part in the level 2, state to state, national to national, individual sanctions to the North Korea, with the going together UN sanctions. So many countries are now in the UN sanctions, and it is very necessary for the level of the country they can to afford to the sanction to North Korea. Maybe the U.S. government stressed in that matter, I think that.
Yeah, I think that basically so far the UN sanctions or individual sanctions by the individual countries focused on mostly economic aspects. But now Korea, United States and other countries are now pointing the diplomatic venue. That is the pressure on other countries to cut off or suspend relationship with North Korea. So I think that this time they are more focusing on diplomatic aspects in addition to existing economic measures.
How do you see the possibility of the North to promote further military provocation in order to strengthen the internal solidarity as well as hinder the global sanction against the North?
Yes, when we talk about the North Korean intention, why they keep developing and threatening using nuclear weapons and ICBM and others, they try to find some excuses, scapegoat, sort of, on targeting United States and Korea and others. That's their excuses for external purposes. But internally, they need some means to placate North Korean people, because these days North Korean people also have a lot of access to outside information, and they begin to recognize the economic hardships and their problems domestically, and then North Korean regime Kim Jong-un try to find some venue for internal solidarity by keep launching these projects militarily for their own purposes.
I think North Korea is very good at provoking the international community by carrying out nuclear provocations and missile tests. But then it's actually it's not guaranteed that North Korea will be able to split the international community's pressure arrayed against it. One example is that after the first nuclear test earlier this year, there was a strong pressure on China to carry out and implement strong sanctions against North Korea, and China was very hesitant to do so. And when South Korea agreed to the deployment of THAAD missile defense system, China used that as an excuse not to implement sanctions against North Korea. So in that sense, North Korean provocation has succeeded in dividing the international community. But when North Korea carried out the fifth nuclear test only a month ago, what happened was that China did no longer have an excuse to not implement sanctions against North Korea. So as you can see, North Korean action and behavior can be productive in the sense that it can divide the international policy coordination against the country, or can be counterproductive. So we have to be very strategic. We meaning like the international community, have to be very strategic about how we apply sanctions and how we manage North Korean provocations.
Increasing number of North Korean people, including the elites, have fled their country. Some people have said that it has shown to impact of the strengthened global sanctions. What is your take on this, the recent rise of defection by the North Korean people, especially the elites?
My short answer to your question would be that this is too soon to tell. We have always witnessed a stream of the North Korean elites leaving the country ever since Kim Il-sung died in the 90s. So the recent examples of defection by the elites in North Korea is not uncommon. It's actually quite ordinary in that sense. But then we have to be. But then I think one indication that the North Korea might be feeling pressure from the sanctions is the fact that when the elites come to South Korea and they have to explain why they have defected the country, it used to be that the reason for defection was political, and also they didn't really say that publicly, but also economic. But now there seems to be something different going on, in the sense that there seems to be some emergence of a different expectation, meaning the elites in Pyongyang seems to have a different expectation about the future of the country. They, instead of thinking about the future of the country as a whole, or like the regime, they are thinking about the expectation for their family members or even for their children. In that sense, I would say that the recent defections resemble like the immigration by the middle class. They are looking better future for their family members, and that shows that there's a difference between what the regime wants for the future and what the people in Pyongyang and also elsewhere in North Korea want for their own futures. And I think this split, I think it's very noteworthy.
Let's now touch upon the current position of China, which can play a critical role in imposing North Korea sanctions. UN Security Council has discussed additional sanctions to close the loopholes in the UNSC Resolution 2270. However, no progress has been made because of the different opinions between the US and China. What kind of stance has China currently taken on the North Korean sanctions?
As you mentioned, China is a very important actor, key player in the sanctions regime and on the matters of the Korean Peninsula. Unfortunately, China has been playing a sort of spoiler rather than facilitator in participating and pressuring sanctions regime on North Korea. I think China has been taking very ambiguous positions so far. In the meantime, they emphasize that they will abide by the resolutions and they will implement faithfully. But on the other hand, they always have been some delaying even negotiations, implementations with all kinds of excuses. Probably they don't like to North Korea to be toppled or any kind of sudden, the impact upon North Korean regime. I think that it has to do with their strategic interest in North Korea. So as well as they think North Korea as an asset rather than a problem, they will behave like that in the future. That's what we have to concern about.
After the fifth nuclear test, through the keynote speech at the UN General Assembly, Premier Li Keqiang of China has left out North Korean sanctions and only emphasized the need to resolve North Korea's nuclear provocation through dialogue. However, right before the UN General Assembly, China has shown its will to the US that it will participate in the global sanction against the North. How do you see the kind of wavering of China's position?
I don't see it as a wavering of China's position. That the ambiguity of China's policy towards North Korea has been pretty permanent and consistent throughout these years. China always emphasizes two priorities when it comes to the Korean Peninsula. One is denuclearization, meaning denuclearization of North Korea. Now, the other one is the peace and stability in the peninsula. So, from the Chinese point of view, sanctions that can that expands in scope and deepens and increases in effectiveness increases the risk of regime change in North Korea, and that's interpreted as instability by the Chinese government. Therefore, they don't want to play up this publicly in the international arena. But at the same time, the Chinese government feels the need to punish North Korea for its provocations. Therefore, in a way, I mean, if you want to characterize this charitably and put yourself, for ourselves in China's shoes, China is actually caught in a bind. So China has to punish North Korea, but cannot punish North Korea to the point that it increases the risk of regime change in North Korea. So that's the reason why we see this kind of mixed message coming out of China today.
There's been the outlook that North Korean nuclear issues might lead to the new Cold War structure between US-Japan alliance and China-Russian structural strategic cooperations. What do you think of the possibility?
Basically, North Korean issues actually deepened the division, the two groups, as you mentioned. I think that the North Korean issue is very difficult to resolve at this moment because of different positions of the two groups. I think that Russia, when you talk about Russia under President Putin, try to regain their influence in international arena. As we see the Ukraine crisis and Syrian cases, and they try to take the United States for gain some bargaining chip over United States in world affairs. I think that that influence the situation in the Korean Peninsula. I think that the suggestion you may say that said about the groupings can be more and more stronger in the future.
I see. A media source has reported there is no change in the total trade volume of the North despite the strengthened global sanctions against the North. Does it mean that the trade between Beijing and Pyongyang has continued so far?
Oh, clearly it's been continuing, but then what I can say is that the fact that it didn't go down is disappointing, but there's no doubt about it. But we have to compare it, the current period to what was going on before. The trade between North Korea and China actually increased more than twice, actually more than doubled between 2009 and 2012, and reached a total amount of $6 billion and after the year 2013, and has stayed around that level since then. So it really depends on how you interpret this trend. If you believe China is doing something in order to punish North Korea for its behavior, you will see that China is not allowing North Korea to increase its trade with China. But at the same time, if you want to see China taking more drastic action against North Korean behavior, this is a little bit disappointing because trade is not going down. But I would say that this also reflects the nature of the trade between China and North Korea. We have sanctions in place, but the sanctions are targeted sanctions. These are very specifically targeting the proliferation activities of North Korea. So the number of targets in the sanctions regime is limited to North Korean entities and individuals which are directly involved in the WMD activities. So in order to have a significant dent, make a significant dent in the Sino and North Korean trade from going on from now, we'll have to expand the scope of sanctions. So we have to transform the targeted sanctions that we have in place right now to more comprehensive economic sanctions. And we'll see if details such a move emerges in the upcoming United Nations Security Council resolution.
I see. International community is planning to block travel to North Korea as part of an effort to squeeze the North. But new tour packages have been developed in China-North Korean borders. Professor Nam, ongoing efforts to prevent further development of North Korea's nuclear capacity have been called into questions. What is your take on this?
Yeah, there are some loopholes in sanctions which private sanctions in Korean trade is not subject to the UN sanctions. So, as you said there, the trade volume between North Korea and China has necessarily some increased before then. it may be Chinese local government near the border in North Korea will increase trade with the North Korea. In addition to that, North Korea is likely to abuse the provision that the private sector is not subject to the UN sanctions. Although the Chinese government actively involved in UN sanctions on North Korea compared to before, but it is far less enforcement power in the local government's trade with North Korea. So international society, including UN sanctions, must urge to the China central government tighten controls to the local governments in trade with the North Korea. And recently, the support of the big road in North Korea province, the China is also constructing the temporary bridge near the Duman River. So the outside we can some dubious about the Chinese tension to supporting the North Korea. Maybe the dissolve or maybe the some problem in international cooperation within the UN sanctions.
After the North launch of the Musudan missile on October 15th, the UN Security Council has approved a statement denouncing North Korea's latest ballistic missile launch. China and Russia, who had remained reluctant to the UNSC resolution on North Korea sanctions after the third deployment issue, has also agreed on the statement. Does it mean that China and Russia are now unlikely to play a role of the protective barrier of North Korea anymore?
Not really. As you know, that the Security Council adopted a presidential statement, which is not legally binding. It's sort of a demonstration of a united will of the Security Council members, but it has only a symbolic and political gesture. It's sort of an oral verbal service to the audience of the world. I think that when we adopt the legally binding resolutions, new or additional measures on the Security Council resolution may make a difference. That's the only part of the processes. Now they are gearing up in the process of the discussion for more effective measures.
North Korea has galvanized efforts to strengthen its diplomatic clout by contacting the United States and China. North Korea and the US had an unofficial meeting last month, but the Korean government hasn't put much weight on it as the meeting went ahead independent of the government. What do you think is the significance of such an informal the talks between the United States and North Korea?
Well, I wouldn't really attach too much importance in the sense that I don't think, and I think a lot of experts will agree with me in that this is not an attempt by the United States to open a channel of dialogue with North Korea to discuss about the final state over the Korean Peninsula or start some negotiation over the North Korea's intention to be recognized as a nuclear state. It's far from that. United States has been maintaining this channel of communication with North Korea, and since actually all the time it hasn't been interrupted. And it's actually open. You can check the U.S. archives, and you will see that the United States and North Korea have held these kind of meetings more than 10 times in the last 3 years alone. So this shows that it's an attempt by North Korea to reach out to the United States to discuss about matters that's important to them. But then the United States has been reciprocating in that intention. And the intention of the United States is to verify whether North Korea is really meaning what it's saying in the public, such as threatening the United States and with nuclear weapons, attacking Washington or Austin, Texas. Are these all real? And then the United States government is wondering whether North Koreans understand what will be the consequences of such actions. And this is actually the intention of the United States, to verify whether North Korea understands what kind of situation they are in.
2 days after the unofficial US-North Korea meeting, Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmin visited North Korea to discuss border issues. Considering that it is the first visit from China after the North Korea's fifth nuclear test, what's the significance of Beijing-Pyongyang meeting and amid the strengthened global sanctions against North?
Yeah, Liu Zhenmin, as the Vice Minister of China government, the Foreign Minister, visited North Korea. It is a high-ranking figure of China's officer who visited to North Korea after fifth nuclear test in North Korea. He may say that, I guess, North Korea not to launch long-range missile launch over the sixth nuclear test. North Korea also wants to pull them out of sanctions and isolation by dialogue with China. But on the other hand, there is some dubious on the possibility of cracks in international sanctions against North Korea. So now in situations, it reflected that the North Korea maybe more actively approached the U.S. and China because of U.S. is the period of the regime change, presidential election becoming. And the North Korea wants to by China and take out of this isolation and the international sanctions thing. So nowadays, North Korea is more assertive approach to the U.S. and China.
As Beijing has continued its trade with Pyongyang, now is time for Seoul and Washington to find another strategy to put stronger pressure on North Korea. What do you think is the best way to boost the global sanctions against North Korea at this time?
The efforts are ongoing in order to increase the impact of sanctions on North Korea. In order to do that, we have to look into how North Korea maintains its regime. And for the regime to survive, it's very important for the regime to make enough hard currency revenue to cater to the elites that forms the foundation of the regime. So we can take two-track approach to increase the impact of sanctions on North Korea. One is to find all the possible channels of revenue that North Korea has outside of China. We know that North Korea makes money, has business going on in Southeast Asia, in Africa, as well as in Europe. These are countries that we can reach out to. I think the reason why President Park visited Uganda and Ethiopia in recent months was to convince those countries to turn away from North Korea and join the international sanctions regime against North Korea. And then, these are countries that will be influenced by our actions and then actions of our allies. So I think we'll be very effective with them. So more difficult problem is how to convince China to be more serious about sanctions against North Korea. And I think we have to have a combination of different approaches. One is clearly economic. The threat of secondary boycott can be effective in moving China's policy to be more in line with the policies of the other countries. But another approach is clearly strategic and political, also as military. I think China reacts very fast to actions by the international community and the United States and Korea that they perceive to be in detriment of their own strategic interest, such as missile defense system. This is a lever that we have on China. So we have to be very smart about how to use it to steer China towards our side of seeing things about North Korea.
I see. Then China has risen as a country that should take responsibility for the challenges facing the North Korean nuclear issues. What kind of efforts are needed in the diplomatic field in order to change the current position of China in terms of North Korea sanctions?
Yes, and related to the North Korean sanctions and the North Korean issue. China seems that the approach to the more force and individual sanctions to North Korea, which enough to shake the stability of Kim Jong-un regime. But it is required that to advise China that if China going on neglect the North Korea's nuclear program, China's international role has to be recognized. It may be the big hurdle China to the responsibility, great power. I think that. And also, it is necessary to emphasize that North Korea's nuclear can be proliferations of the nuclear in Northeast Asia region. And it may be causing the China's national security and the military security would be unsafe. China must know that fact. And the North Korea's nuclear development will foster the military cooperation between South Korea and US and Japan. And it will be also be a very huge burden for China. So China must know this fact and more assertive control the North Korea and more approach to the resolve to the North Korean's nuclear issue.
On October 27th, Vice Foreign Minister of Korea, US, and Japan had a meeting to discuss the stronger sanction against North Korea. It can be a significant pressure on North Korea, as well as even China, who has shown a little bit passive attitude toward North Korean sanction. What do you think would be the impact of the recent trilateral meeting among the three countries?
As we recognize it, the sanctions, even under the UN resolutions, very much pushed and implemented by three key countries, United States, Japan, and Korea. I think that beside the UN sanctions, I think that these three countries can be united to take some sort of unilateral individual sanctions collectively. I think the United States as a superpower, they have all venues. Also Japan can play a very important role. Korea is also very determined to do so. So I think that this collaboration among the three countries indicates that we have a very strong will to implement at the bottom level. We may have some political, resolutions and the political determination globally, but when it comes to implementation, we need this kind of very specific action plan. I think that that's very positive for pressuring North Korea.
Japan has been considering the implementation of the unilateral sanctions against the North, which will be similar to the secondary boycott sanctions from the US. It would sanction companies and individuals in third-party countries that engaged in business with the North. Can it be translated as a sanction targeting Chinese firms?
I don't think Japan would take the lead in targeting Chinese firms, in my view. I think Japan would wait the United States to take the first step in targeting Chinese firms that are dealing with North Korean state enterprises. And the reason is because it's very difficult for Japan to unilaterally increase tension in the region. As you may know, also you well know, China and Japan have an ongoing conflict in the East China Sea around the Senkaku Island. I doubt that the Japanese government would be able to implement so nakedly sanctions against Chinese firms. But one way to circumvent the problem is for Japan to target the North Korean firms that deal with the Chinese firms. So target the products that are made in China that are suspected to be made by the North Korean workers, either in North Korea or in China, because there are a substantial number of North Korean workers working in China itself. So if they decide to boycott the import of Chinese products that the Japanese government suspect are being made with North Korean labor, that'll have a similar effect to secondary boycott without declaring that Japan is actually implementing secondary boycott.
What would be the ideal level of North Korea sanctions as well as participants of other countries in order to promote the global sanctions for the denuclearization more effectively? Professor Nam?
Yes, it's a very difficult task for us and the international community. I think that regardless of whether North Korean nuclear tests continue and whether their capabilities also continue to improve, international sanctions of UN targeting North Korea must remain consistent and enforced. And as we previously said, that the imposition of additional sanctions in the wake of the future nuclear test include sanctions targeting private exchange and finance sanctions and so on. But I would like to state more important factors. Human rights in North Korea. The North Korean problem appears on the surface to be one of the nuclear development over the missile issue. But actually, its real problem is one of the human rights, to the rising interest and the pressure of the international community with respect to the fundamental rights of the North Korean people is the way to near approach for solving the problems of North Korea issue or the problems. Not only the elites, but the North Korean people have begun to think about the personal freedom and the future of their life and the future of their children. So, South Korea, including, and international society must increase and support the changes in North Korea. It's very, very important. More than I would like to stress that the nuclear issue. I would like recommend it this way to we and the international community go together to the pay to the North Korean people.
I see. The most important factor would be preparing fundamental solution to tackle the North Korean nuclear issues, as well as laying a firm foundation for the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. What more do you think is needed for the Korean government to boost global cooperation on North Korean sanctions?
I think we have to continue our efforts to boost the diplomatic and political pressure on the North Korean regime. And I think that effort is ongoing and it's been very productive. And in part it's because North Korea itself is helping us in that regard. North Korea doesn't want to improve the human rights situation for its own people. North Korea doesn't want to open up the country to receive outside investment. North Korea doesn't want to decrease the tension in the region. So all these factors are aiding South Korea and its allies to maintain the high level of cooperation when it comes to sanctions against North Korea. But then I think a key piece is missing here, which is China. I think whether we like it or not, China is a very important player when it comes to the success of our pressure for the current sanctions policy on North Korea. And then we seem to approach China very unidimensionally. Instead of asking China to cooperate when it comes to sanctions or not, or face the consequences, we should talk to the Chinese and ask them about what is their ultimate goal when it comes to North Korea. What are their fears? What are their interests? We should open up a formal conversation with them to address the uncertainty that immobilizes China when it comes to taking action against North Korea. I think this is the beginning of strategic dialogue with China. We should go beyond talking about just levels of sanctions or whether North Korea is going to collapse or not, but we should address the policy goals that China has in North Korea, and we should be open-minded about it.
What more do you think is needed for the South Korean government to boost global cooperation on North Korean sanctions?
We know that now the situation and the circumstance between two Koreas and the Northeast Asian region is a very pessimistic situation. But I would like to say Korean government and the Korean people make more the positive thing or positive dream. And so we more loudly speak about the possibility of the unification and the freedom of the North Korean people. So we make some information brought to the North Korean people. So I think that this very difficult situation may be overcome by the Korean government and the international community. In addition to that, we Korean people also join this road. I would recommend it that way.
I think that at this moment the UN sanctions are in the right track, and we should put more pressure on North Korea up to the point where they think twice about their future and their plan for nuclearization. I think the UN Security Council measures should be tightened. In the meantime, as Dr. Go mentioned, that we should persuade China how important is denuclearized North Korea, maybe contributing to stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, and the eventual reunification of Korea will be bonanza for their own fate. So I think we should take two fronts, one political and economic pressure on the other hand, and using China as a leverage over North Korea for more open society and then changing their policy.
Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your opinions today.